They thought I was weak. They looked at my wrinkled hands, my slow walk, my quiet way of speaking, and they decided I had nothing left to offer. To them, I was just another old man, sitting in the corner of life, forgotten by the world that once needed me. But they didn't know what those years had taught me, the kind of lessons that can't be found in any book or school. They didn't know that experience doesn't fade with age, it deepens. I used to be the kind of man people came to for advice. My house was full of noise, laughter, arguments, music, stories. My children and grandchildren filled my life with purpose. But slowly, as time went by, things changed. They stopped asking for my opinion. They started making decisions on their own. And I, out of love, let them. I thought it was part of life's circle. Parents guide their children until the day the children think they've outgrown guidance. I remember the day it truly hit me. My eldest son, Michael, had called a family meeting at his new house. I'd been excited. It had been months since we'd all gathered together. I polished my shoes, ironed my old gray suit, and carried a box of fresh-baked cookies, the kind my grandkids used to fight over. But when I arrived, they barely noticed. The television was on, conversations were flying, and my presence, once something that anchored the room, now felt invisible. "Dad, sit down," Michael said, without even looking up from his phone. No hug, no smile, just words tossed into the air like an afterthought. I smiled anyway. I've learned in my years that dignity isn't about how others treat you. It's about how you respond. But I'd be lying if I said it didn't hurt. I sat quietly, watching as my children debated finances, plans, investments, things I had once taught them about when they could barely keep their first savings account balanced. Then came the words that stung more than any wound I'd ever felt. "Dad, maybe it's time you stop worrying about things," Michael said, leaning back in his chair. "You should relax. You've done enough." He meant it kindly, I think. But to me, it sounded like a door closing, like the final chapter of a book I wasn't ready to finish. That night, when I returned home, I sat on the porch with a cup of tea and thought about how quietly people can fade out of their own families. Not with a fight or a farewell, but with silence. They didn't mean harm. They just forgot that I was still here, still capable, still alive, still thinking, still learning. The next morning, I decided something. I wasn't going to fade away quietly. Not because I needed to prove them wrong, but because I needed to remind myself, and maybe them, what it truly means to live. I began small. I woke up before dawn and walked to the park again, the way I used to when my wife was still alive. The air was sharp and cold, but it felt honest, real. I watched the sunrise alone, feeling the first spark of something I hadn't felt in years: purpose. On my way home, I passed a young man struggling to push his broken-down car off the road. Without thinking, I helped him. He looked surprised, as if a man my age shouldn't have that kind of strength. When we finally got it to the side, he said, "Sir, I didn't think you could manage that." I just smiled. Son, don't ever assume what someone can or can't do because of what they look like. Strength isn't just muscle, it's will. That sentence stuck with me. Maybe it was for him, but maybe it was also for me. In the days that followed, I began volunteering at the local community center. I'd seen a flyer about teaching basic carpentry to underprivileged youth. My hands had built furniture, houses, even dreams once. Why not use them again? The first day, they stared at me, just like everyone else did, as though I was a relic of another time. But when I picked up the tools, muscle memory guided me like an old friend. I showed them how to measure twice and cut once, how to sand wood until it gleamed like a mirror. And slowly, I saw something in their eyes: respect. That night, when I returned home, I looked in the mirror and barely recognized the man staring back. He wasn't weak. He wasn't helpless. He was alive again. Days turned into weeks, and the community center became my new family. I found people who valued what I knew, who asked questions and listened with genuine curiosity. They didn't care about my age, only about my heart, my skill, and my stories. Meanwhile, my children hardly noticed. They assumed I was just keeping busy. They didn't know how alive I felt, or how my days had begun to fill with meaning again. But life has a funny way of revealing truths at the right moment. One Sunday afternoon, Michael stopped by my house, unannounced. He looked surprised to find me in my workshop. surrounded by sawdust, wood, and half-finished furniture. "Dad, you're still doing this?" he asked, looking around like he'd stumbled into a memory he'd forgotten existed. I smiled, wiping sweat from my brow. "Still, son?" I never stopped. I just paused for a while. He chuckled awkwardly, unsure how to respond. But I could see something flicker behind his eyes, maybe pride, maybe confusion. He didn't expect to find me like this. And that's when I realized something. Sometimes people need to see strength to remember it. Sometimes they need to be reminded that wisdom and power don't fade with age. They just change form. That day was the beginning of a change I didn't expect, not just in my life, but in theirs. Over the next few months, my workshop became more than just a space for wood and tools. It became a place where life found its rhythm again. The sound of saws and hammers was like music to my soul. Each creak of the floor, each scent of fresh-cut pine, carried memories of when my kids were small, helping me build their first treehouse. Funny how the same hands that once built toys for them were now building meaning for me. One morning, while I was teaching a group of teenagers at the community center, a reporter showed up. Apparently, someone had told her about the old man who teaches kids life lessons through carpentry. She wanted to do a feature for the local paper. I almost said no. I wasn't looking for attention. But she insisted, and something in me thought, maybe this story isn't just mine anymore. Maybe someone out there needs to hear it. She spent an hour watching me work with the kids, showing them how to steady their hands, how to measure not just wood, but patience. She asked me questions about why I do this. I told her the truth, because purpose doesn't retire. It just waits for you to find it again. A week later, the story came out. My picture, sawdust on my shirt, a proud smile on my face, was printed under the headline, 75-year-old craftsman teaches youth that life's work never ends. I didn't think much of it until the phone started ringing. Old friends, neighbors, even strangers, they all reached out. Some wanted to learn, others just wanted to talk. But the most unexpected call came from my daughter, Emily. "Dad, I saw the article," she said. "You didn't tell us about this," I chuckled. "You didn't ask." She was quiet for a moment. Then, softer. "I'm proud of you." It's funny how 4 simple words can mean so much after years of silence. That weekend, Emily and her kids came to visit. My grandkids ran through the house like they used to, asking questions about every tool in my workshop. For the first time in a long time, laughter filled these walls again. Michael showed up a few days later. He wasn't one to say much, but he brought a cup of coffee and sat beside me while I worked. For a while, we didn't talk. We just shared the silence, the kind that speaks louder than words. Finally, he said, "Dad, I think I forgot who you were." I smiled, still sanding the edge of a chair. "That's all right, son. I never forgot who you were." He looked down, ashamed. "I treated you like you didn't matter anymore. You were busy living your life." "I understand," I said. "But life doesn't stop teaching, Michael. Even when you think you've learned it all, it'll hand you another lesson." He nodded slowly. That day, something shifted between us. Not forgiveness, not yet, but understanding. Over time, my workshop became a bridge between generations. My children visited more often. My grandkids begged to help. I taught them how to carve initials into wood, how to fix things instead of throwing them away. And maybe, through all that, they started to see that age doesn't make you weaker. It just makes you wiser. But as much as life was getting brighter, fate wasn't done testing me. One cold evening, I received a call from the community center director. There had been a fire, electrical wiring, short circuit. The place where I'd spent months rebuilding my spirit was gone. I rushed there as fast as I could, the smell of smoke still thick in the air. Ashes covered everything. The benches we built, the shelves, the memories. The kids stood around, silent, eyes wide with disbelief. One of them, a boy named Luis, looked up at me and said, "What do we do now, Mr. Harris?" For a moment, I didn't know what to say. My heart sank. All our work, gone. But then, a strange calm washed over me. I looked at them, These kids who had once thought I was just an old man. And I realized this was my chance to teach them the most important lesson of all. We rebuild, I said simply. The next morning, I gathered my old friends, some of the community kids, even a few parents. We found a small, empty warehouse nearby. I told them we'd make it our new space. The fire might have taken our walls, but it didn't take our hands or our will. For weeks, we worked from dawn to dusk, hammering, painting, cleaning. The news caught wind of it again, this time calling it the Rebuild Project. Donations started pouring in: wood, paint, tools. Even people who had never picked up a hammer showed up to help. And every evening when I looked around at the tired, smiling faces, I felt a sense of peace. They weren't helping an old man. They were helping a vision. When we finally reopened, the new community center was even better than before. On the first day back, the kids hung a sign above the entrance. It read, "Wisdom builds again." That broke me. Not in sadness, but in gratitude. Emily cried when she saw it. Michael hugged me for the first time in years. Even the mayor showed up, shaking my hand and saying, "You've done something remarkable here, Mr. Harris." But all I could think of was something my wife used to say: "A good heart never grows old." That night, sitting alone on my porch, I looked up at the stars and smiled. I could almost feel her beside me. "You see, love?" I whispered. They thought I was weak. But you and I, we knew better. The phone buzzed beside me, a message from Michael. It said, "Dad, thank you for reminding me what strength really means." I leaned back, feeling the cool night air against my face, and realized something I wished everyone could understand. Aging isn't losing your power. It's learning how to use it differently. I wasn't a weak, helpless old man. I was living proof that wisdom, real wisdom, can rebuild anything. And as I sat there, with sawdust on my shirt and pride in my heart, I finally understood. The world might underestimate the old, but those who've walked through fire know exactly how to rise from the ashes. The weeks that followed the reopening were some of the busiest and most fulfilling days of my life. The new workshop became a beacon in our small town. Kids who once roamed the streets with nothing to do now had a place to learn, to build, to belong. Adults came too, some wanting to help, some wanting to remember what it felt like to create something with their hands again. I found myself mentoring not just about carpentry, but about life. When a young boy complained that his table leg wasn't straight, I told him, "Perfection isn't the goal, son. Purpose is. Even crooked wood holds up a home if you build it with care." He laughed, but I could see the truth settle somewhere deep in his heart. Word spread fast. Schools began sending students to volunteer. Retired folks joined in, saying they hadn't felt this alive in years. We became a family, not one of blood, but of effort and respect. And for the first time since my wife passed, I felt surrounded by love again. One day, a young journalist came to do a follow-up story for a national magazine. She wanted to know what drove me to keep going at my age. I thought about it for a moment, then said, "You know, when people get old, they think their value fades. But age doesn't take away your purpose. It just reveals who truly sees it." She nodded, scribbling in her notebook. Then she asked, "And what about those who didn't see your value before?" I smiled faintly. Sometimes they have to lose sight of you to finally realize what you meant. A few days later, that article went viral. Suddenly, people from all over the country were writing to me. Letters, emails, messages. Some said my story inspired them to reconnect with their parents. Others said they finally understood what it means to live with purpose. I didn't expect that. I never wanted fame, but it seemed like my quiet little workshop had turned into something much larger, a movement of sorts. Then came the moment that changed everything again. I was working late one evening when Michael came by, holding a small wooden box. He looked nervous. "Dad," he said quietly, "can we talk?" "Of course," I replied, setting down my chisel. He sat down beside me, hands trembling slightly. "I've been meaning to tell you this for a long time," he began. "When Mom died, I didn't just lose her. I lost my direction. I buried myself in work because it was easier than facing how much I'd failed you." I didn't interrupt. I could see the years of guilt in his eyes. He continued, "When you started building this place, I thought you were wasting your time. I told Emily you were chasing something pointless, but I was wrong. You've done more for people here than I ever have with my career." He slid the small box across the table toward me. "I made this for you." Inside was a beautifully crafted wooden plaque, carved with the words, "For the man who built more than wood, he built hearts." My hand shook as I touched it. I couldn't speak for a moment. Finally, I whispered, "Thank you, son." He smiled, eyes wet. "No, Dad. Thank you." We hugged then, really hugged, for the first time in years. And in that embrace, all the resentment, all the distance, melted away. From that day on, Michael became a regular at the workshop. He didn't know much about carpentry, but he was eager to learn. Sometimes, he'd stay late just to talk. One night as we locked up, he said, "You know, Dad, I used to think strength was about how much you could carry. But you've shown me it's about how much you can give." That line stayed with me. As the months went on, our little workshop became a symbol of renewal, not just for me, but for everyone who stepped through its doors. We hosted free repair days for the elderly, built furniture for families in need, even started a scholarship fund for kids who wanted to study craftsmanship. The town rallied behind us. Emily, who had once barely called, became one of my biggest supporters. She helped organize fundraisers, and her children, my grandkids, became inseparable from me. They'd run into the workshop shouting, "Grandpa, what are we building today?" Each time I saw their faces light up, I was reminded that legacy isn't about leaving something behind. It's about passing something on. But one day, as I was closing up, I felt a sharp pain in my chest. It hit me like lightning. I sat down, gasping, the world spinning around me. I don't know how long I sat there before Emily found me. I woke up in a hospital bed, machines humming softly around me. My children stood nearby, Emily holding my hand, Michael looking pale and worried. The doctor told me it was a mild heart attack. I'd pushed myself too hard. For a moment, I felt fear, not of dying, but of losing what I'd built. But then I saw the look in my children's eyes, fear, love, and realization. Emily whispered, "We almost lost you, Dad. We can't let that happen again." Michael nodded. "We'll take care of you, okay? No more doing this alone." For once, I let them. It felt strange, being cared for by the same people who once forgot I existed. But it wasn't pity in their eyes this time. It was love, real, conscious love. While I recovered, they kept the workshop running. When I returned weeks later, the place was alive again. The kids cheered when they saw me, shouting, "Mr. Harris is back!" Michael had even hung a new sign at the entrance. It read, "Where wisdom lives forever." That broke me again, in the best way possible. As I looked around at the laughter, the sawdust, the life humming through the air, I realized something profound. I didn't just rebuild a workshop. I rebuilt my family. They thought I was weak once. But it turns out, strength isn't about defying age. It's about defying doubt. And as I stood there, surrounded by people who once saw me as fragile, I smiled and whispered to myself, This is what real power looks like." The doctor's orders were simple. Slow down, take care, let others help. But slowing down had never been my strong suit. Still, for the first time, I wasn't alone in anything anymore. Every morning, before I could even pick up a tool, Michael or Emily would stop by with breakfast and coffee. Sometimes we'd sit in silence. Sometimes we'd talk for hours about everything we'd missed over the years. The laughter, the regrets, the lost time. I could see that they were trying, not out of guilt anymore, but from genuine love. That meant more to me than any apology ever could. The workshop became more than a place of work. It became a heartbeat of connection, the smell of fresh wood, the rhythm of saws, the chatter of volunteers. It all felt like music now. I'd stand in the corner, watching people laugh and build and fix things together, and think, this is what family really looks like. One afternoon, I found myself helping a young girl named Lucy, maybe 10 years old, trying to carve a bird out of a block of wood. She frowned, frustrated that the shape wasn't coming out right. "It doesn't look like a bird," she said, voice trembling. I knelt beside her and said, "You know, when I started, my first carving looked more like a potato than a bird. But I didn't stop. I kept carving until it began to look the way I saw it in my heart. Sometimes you have to believe in what it can be before it becomes that. She smiled, her small hand steadying. You really think I can make it look right? I know you can, I said. By the end of the day, she had made something beautiful. Not perfect, but hers. She hugged me before she left, whispering, "Thank you for believing in me." That night, as I sat alone in my armchair, I realized something had shifted in me. When I first started the workshop, I did it to prove something, to show the world, my family, maybe even myself, that I wasn't done yet. But now, it wasn't about proving anything anymore. It was about giving, about passing on what time had taught me. Wisdom, I realized, isn't loud. It doesn't shout or demand attention. It just shows up, quietly, consistently, until people finally understand its worth. A few months later, the mayor invited me to speak at a community event. I laughed at first. What could an old man like me possibly say that people haven't already heard? Michael, standing beside me, said softly, "You could remind them that it's never too late to matter." So I agreed. The night of the event, the town hall was packed. Rows of faces, young, old, familiar, filled the seats. As I stepped up to the microphone, my hands trembled, but my heart was calm. "I've been called many things in my life," I began. "A father, a husband, a craftsman, and sometimes a burden. But what I've learned in 78 years is this: being underestimated is one of life's greatest gifts. Because when people stop expecting from you, you finally have the freedom to surprise them." There was a murmur in the crowd, some nods, some smiles. I used to think strength meant muscles, youth, speed. But real strength, is staying kind when the world turns cold. It's forgiving people who forgot you. It's choosing to keep building when life keeps breaking you. I paused, letting the silence stretch. They called me a weak old man once. But look around you. This workshop, these people, these hands, this is what a lifetime of wisdom can do. When I finished, the room erupted in applause. But the sound that struck me most wasn't the clapping. It was the quiet sniffles. The sound of hearts remembering. After the speech, dozens of people came up to thank me. Some were crying, some smiling. A young man said, "My father's in a nursing home, and I haven't visited him in months. I'm going tomorrow." That moment alone made everything worth it. Life had given me a second chance, not just to live, but to leave something meaningful behind. As the months rolled on, the workshop expanded. We built a small library corner filled with books on craftsmanship, philosophy, and life lessons. People would drop by just to read, talk, or sit in peace. We even started recording the stories of our older members, veterans, widows, retirees, preserving their experiences so no one would ever forget what wisdom sounds like. Sometimes, late at night, I'd sit under the soft glow of the hanging bulbs, listening to the faint hum of crickets outside, and think about how far I'd come. I had once been a man left behind, forgotten by his own blood. Now I was surrounded by new family, people who saw me not as a burden, but as a pillar. Then one evening, as I was locking up, I saw Michael standing by the door, a quiet smile on his face. "You've changed this town, Dad," he said. I chuckled. "No, son. I just reminded it what it means to care." He nodded slowly. "You know, I used to think I had to make you proud, but I realize now I just had to learn from you." We stood there in silence, father and son. No words left to fix, no time left to regret, just peace. And as we walked home together under the orange glow of the streetlights, I thought about all the people who had ever been told they were too old, too weak, too late. I wish they could stand where I stood now, to know that age isn't the end. It's the proof that you've survived everything meant to break you. The next morning, as I stepped into the workshop again, I whispered a quiet promise to myself. Keep building, keep teaching, keep believing. Because sometimes the strongest hands are the ones people stopped noticing long ago. A year had passed since that night at the town hall. The workshop had grown into something far greater than I ever imagined. It wasn't just a place to craft wood. It had become a place where people rebuilt themselves. The young came to learn. The old came to feel useful again. The broken came to heal. Every morning when I arrived, the smell of sawdust mixed with coffee welcomed me like an old friend. There was laughter, chatter, and sometimes even music playing from an old radio in the corner. My hands had grown slower, my grip weaker, but my heart had never been stronger. One day, Emily brought me a letter. "It's from the state council," she said, her eyes bright. I opened it carefully. Inside was an official notice. They wanted to recognize our workshop as a community restoration center for its impact on mental health, education, and unity among generations. I laughed softly. Imagine that. All I wanted was a place to pass time, and now they want to make it official. Emily smiled. "You didn't just pass time, Dad. You changed lives." Those words hit deeper than any award ever could. Because that's what I had once longed to hear. Not recognition, not pity, but understanding. The kind that says, "You still matter." Later that evening, I sat outside the workshop, the golden light of sunset spilling through the windows. The tools hung neatly on the wall. The smell of fresh pine lingered in the air. I could hear distant laughter from the volunteers finishing up for the day. I thought about my past, about the factory where I'd worked for 40 years, about the house I built with my own hands, about my wife, who had passed years before. I thought about my children, how time and pride had built walls between us. But now, those walls were gone. Michael came out and sat beside me, handing me a mug of tea. We watched the sky fade into a dusky purple. "Do you ever think about the old days, Dad?" he asked. "Every day," I said. "But I don't miss them anymore. I used to think the best parts of my life were behind me. Turns out they were waiting for me to show up." He nodded, taking a sip. "You know, I think Mom would have been proud," I smiled. "She already is." There was a long, comfortable silence between us. Then Michael said something I'll never forget. "When I grow old, I hope I'll have half your strength." I chuckled. "Then you'll have to start practicing now, son. Strength doesn't come from lifting things. It comes from holding on when everyone else lets go." He looked at me, his eyes glassy, and I realized that maybe, for the first time in his life, he truly understood me. As the days turned into months, the workshop became a living legacy. People started calling it Harold's Haven. Schools brought children for field trips to learn about craftsmanship and history. Local journalists came to interview me, asking how it all began. I always gave the same answer. It began the day someone called me useless. There's a strange beauty in that. The idea that sometimes pain plants the seeds of purpose. One morning, a letter arrived from Lucy, the young girl who'd once carved that crooked bird. She wrote, "Dear Mr. Harold, I'm studying art now, and I never forgot what you told me, that you have to see what something can be before it becomes that. Every time I create, I remember your words. Thank you for believing in me when I didn't believe in myself." Tears welled in my eyes as I read it. That small act of encouragement had blossomed into something extraordinary. As I grew older, my steps slowed, but my purpose didn't. Even when my hands trembled too much to hold the chisel, I sat in my chair at the front of the workshop, greeting people as they came in. They'd tell me their stories, their troubles, their hopes. I'd listen, sometimes offer a word or two, and they'd always leave lighter than they came. One day, as the sun dipped low, painting everything in hues of amber, I closed my eyes and thought about the boy I once was. The boy who thought success meant working hard until there was nothing left of you. And then I thought about the man I became, the man who learned that true strength isn't in building walls, but in opening doors. When I opened my eyes, I saw Michael standing at the entrance, looking at the workshop filled with people laughing and creating. "You did it, Dad," he said softly. "No," I replied, smiling. "We did." He walked over, knelt beside me, and took my hand. "You've changed me. I used to measure a man's worth by what he could earn. Now I measure it by what he can give." I squeezed his hand gently. "Then you've learned the most important lesson of all." As night fell, the soft glow from the workshop light spilled out into the quiet street. The hum of life inside, hammering, laughter, the whir of machines blended into a song of renewal. And I realized then that I had finally done what I set out to do. Not to prove them wrong, but to prove that growing old doesn't mean fading away. It means shining brighter in the spaces that need your light most. People used to look at me and see weakness. But now, when they looked, they saw something else. Steadiness, warmth, and the kind of strength that can't be measured by muscle or money. I wasn't just a man who'd been forgotten once. I was living proof that time doesn't take away your power. It simply changes how you use it. As I sat there, surrounded by the laughter of those I'd inspired, I whispered to myself, they thought I was a weak, helpless old man. But all along, I was just waiting for the right moment to show them what a lifetime of wisdom can truly do. And in that quiet moment, I smiled, not because I had won anything, but because I had finally understood everything.